Good evening, everyone, and the big conversation. Again, an honor and a privilege to have another very esteemed member of our community join us tonight. Dr. Rachel Landau is a proud Aussie, as she calls herself, born and bred in Melbourne. And when it comes to London, she's a true Woodside Parker, having lived in the local area on and off since 1990. She was even introduced to her husband Adam for the first time in the shul courtyard on a Shabbat morning. And before COVID, you could do that type of thing. Dr. Landau obtained her medical degree in Australia and is a specialist in emergency medicine. And she is clinical director for emergency care and integrated medicine at Whittington Health. Dr. Landau, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a real, as I said, honor and a privilege to have you. First of all, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I've got a week's holiday, so I'm
great.
Time out of work, which is great.
Okay, great. So I've caught you a good time then.
Absolutely.
Just before we start, I just wanted to say thank you so much again for giving of your time, for giving of your holiday time for us at Woodside Park, and thank you. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Just before we get into the nitty-gritty of what you do and the various questions we could ask you about the current situation and everything else, I thought it'd be interesting to hear a bit about yourself. And what struck me just from the beginning of your bio is the fact that you moved over from Melbourne or from Australia to the UK. And I'm just wondering what it was about the UK that attracted you to come move here and pursue your career here.
Okay, I didn't really ever move here. I came, like a lot of Australians who absolutely love to travel, I came on a working holiday in 1990, and my plan was to stay for 6 months, and here I am. So I think it was a good lesson in the fact that life doesn't always go to plan.
Yeah.
And in the nicest possible way, having come here and done again what Australians love to do, which is travel a bit, work in between to earn some more money to travel a bit more. So I was working locum work at the time and doing lots and lots of trips to Europe. When you're an Australian, everything is very, very far away. It takes a long time to get places. So it's a real buzz to come somewhere like London and know, although not at the moment, but under normal circumstances, you can jump on a plane and go somewhere else. So I spent a lot of time earning money to go other places and really enjoyed my time over here, made some nice friends, met the man who's now my husband. And so I've kind of ended up back here. I've been back here sort of full time since 2001 when I came to my current job at the Whittington. Kind of got enticed over here by the hospital and decided it was a good idea at the time to do that job for a year.
Amazing. Well, that actually leads a very nice lead to my next question, and that is, I wanted to hear a lot about what you do because I can see your job description, but I think it would be really helpful if you let us know exactly what that means. But I'm curious as to why you chose emergency medicine. What made you choose that sort of specific path within medicine?
Okay. At secondary school, I wanted to be a lawyer. Spent quite a few years thinking about doing law. And then, for reasons that are still not entirely clear to me, changed my mind and applied to medical school. Went to medical school, and as medical students, you get an opportunity to try out different things. You have placements in different specialty areas. And I had the opportunity as a fourth-year medical student to spend a week in what was then called the casualty department of the hospital I was training at, and really, really enjoyed that week, to the extent that then as a fifth-year medical student, when you get the opportunity to go somewhere for 3 months on a medical elective, I found myself a placement at the Hadassah Medical Center in Yerushalayim, in Ein Kerem, in the emergency department there. So I spent 3 months in that emergency department as a medical student, absolutely loved it, and decided that that was probably going to be the specialty for me. I think it's something to do with the variety of things that you see. I go to work on any given day not quite knowing what sorts of patients I'm going to see, what sorts of problems I'm going to deal with. And I've been doing it for quite a long time, and that hasn't really changed at all. It's still a bit of a surprise every day what I need to deal with. My role now, as I'm more senior, is a mixed one, though. It's part clinical work and I have sort of a number of management-related responsibilities. So my clinical director role is some management oversight of the areas I'm responsible for, which is emergency care and our medical wards at the Whittington as well. And then I've got various other roles in emergency care at a sort of London level to help sort of support the specialty, support developments in the specialty and excellence.
Wow, sounds like you've got a lot on your plate, and I can imagine that during the the current crisis, things are probably very different to anything you've experienced in the past. Am I correct in assuming that, or has
I've not experienced a pandemic before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any of us have experienced a pandemic before. Before this, what we would call in hospital parlance a major incident was very much something that happened very quickly. It was a train crash, or very sadly those occasions when there has been an episode of terror related, and we would see we'd see a large number of patients in a very short period of time with
Mm-hmm.
significant problems. The difference with this is a bit of a slow burner.
Mm-hmm.
This is a problem that has been, crept up on us, best part of 6 months ago now. And obviously, as we all know, is showing no real signs of going away. So we're in that sort of incident mode, but not a sort of what we would call a big bang over a day or two, but really a true slow burner.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And something I've been thinking about as well is the fact we've all been seeing on the news that many fewer people have been actually turning up to the emergency room at hospitals for fear of COVID, even though they probably should be going in. Is that something you've been experiencing at the Whittington as well?
We at the peak of the COVID surge in sort of late March, April time, our numbers dropped right back. We were down at less than half our normal daily attendances, and those numbers have steadily crept back. I think you're right. During the peak of the pandemic, I think people were quite nervous about coming to hospital. They were concerned that they would be exposed to COVID. And I think there's also an element in this sort of circumstance that people feel when they have other problems that they somehow don't want to bother the hospital, bother the system with other things, whilst it was clear from the media that things were pretty hectic.
Well, I was wondering, so what could you say to reassure people that those two things are absolutely not true, and that they shouldn't be taking those into consideration?
I think it's absolutely safe to come to hospital if you need to. I think the biggest piece of work at a hospital level since things settled down a little bit in sort of May time has been working to make sure that hospitals are safe places, both for patients who are still coming with COVID-related issues, but also safe places for people who need to attend hospital with concerns that are completely unrelated to COVID. Our big fear now as clinicians is that there are people who've been, sitting at home for 3 or 4 months with problems that really do need medical attention, and that almost becomes in some way sort of collateral damage from COVID. If people have got problems that need attending to and they don't seek help. The challenge we have though is we have to be very, very careful with our physical space, because we need to maintain social distancing so we can protect patients. What you really don't want to have is somebody coming to hospital and contracting COVID while they're there for some other problem. So we need the space to look after COVID patients and non-COVID patients in separate areas. And there's a lot of work going on to make that happen. So to that extent, we are looking as a system to find ways of maybe reducing the number of people that are turning up to the hospital emergency department front doors if there are other reasonable places for them to be looked after, so that we keep our emergency departments for the people that really need to be there. But we do absolutely encourage those people to seek help if they need to. And the services are there 24/7 as they have always been.
That's interesting. I would imagine that if a good system gets put in place, it might be that becomes the new normal, even post COVID. Would you say that might be something that could happen in the future?
I think that's the direction of travel at the moment. There are some Scandinavian models that really depend on what at the moment is being colloquially called here, and I'm not sure it's got a formal title yet, but talk before you walk. So asking people to make contact with you know, whether it's 111 or 911 before going to hospital, but really discouraging people from simply turning up. And I think it's the Danish model that allows people to call, get some advice. Now, obviously, immediate emergencies need to be in the hospital, but otherwise people will, you know, there's some idea that people might even be made appointments so that we can see people safely and actually just manage the flow through the front doors, because what we can't manage are the waiting rooms that were overcrowded and, you know, those places that are pretty tight squeezed beforehand, and really now with social distancing just are in an untenable situation.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that sort of video doctor assessments might also become something which is a lot more common than was previously used in the past. I know it's happening now for appointments, but potentially could be used for something like this as well.
If COVID had any sort of silver lining, it was the speed with which some changes have been made to the NHS that were kind of in the pipeline, but in the best traditions of the NHS, things tend to take a long time to happen. And people really pulled together as sort of everybody went into sort of full throttle to deal with COVID in sort of late February, March time. So certainly a lot of non-emergency work is being done now virtually. So whether it's video consultations or some still on the telephone, but certainly, you know, much less face-to-face. And the plan is moving forward that some of that still stays virtual. When it comes to emergency care, there are models of using virtual consultations. I suppose it depends a little bit on where you're talking about. If you're talking about delivering emergency care in places where you've got long distances to travel to hospital, that will very much be put in place now, and I think those developments will speed up. We're not doing virtual consultations yet, but I wouldn't never say never. You know, a year or two feels like it's very far into the future, so it's possible we'll move things along very, very quickly.
I'm fascinated that you talk about that with the silver lining, about the way that the speed through the speed at which things can move now at the NHS, because it's almost exactly the same thing I was hearing at the Nightingale Hospital when I did sort of my brief time over there. They were saying exactly the same thing, that in the past it's taken so long to get anything done, and now there's no time to lose. So things are getting done at a speed they've never been done before in the NHS. It's
really interesting. The hurdles that normally need to be jumped to procure a piece of equipment or to set up a new system are often quite slow, and that's not because people are not necessarily trying, but you have a lot of people in the mix sometimes, and it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult to do things things speedily, and everybody has really pulled together. And you mentioned the Nightingale, pulling a facility like that together in the short space of time. Thankfully it wasn't needed for what it was set up for. It didn't need to have 4,000 ventilated patients, but I guess it proved that the system can do some pretty amazing things in very, very short order.
So let me ask you about that then. In terms of right now, looking back 3 months, the first guest I had on here was also a doctor. That was about 3 months ago, I think. And it was sort of early days over here where we weren't quite sure where things were going to go. And I'm wondering how much the NHS has learnt over the past 3 months that can allow them to be better prepared, both practically and just in terms of the know-how. If God forbid there was another spike, and if things did get worse, what do the NHS now know that they could probably put into good use if things got worse?
I think there's knowledge that's been gained at a sort of direct patient level, at a clinical level, because this disease was an unknown one at the end of last year. So there weren't the textbooks to consult about, what the clinical symptoms were, how to manage the patient, what the treatments were. And I think, although we're absolutely still learning, the experience of large numbers of patients has really moved apace. I think the other thing is, this is a pandemic of the 21st century, and for instance, the ability to share information across the internet, across social media, There's very, very active what they call med Twitter, so the sort of medical fraternity on Twitter. So it's an ability to share information very, very quickly. So we were learning about the experiences in Italy, for instance, and that was helping inform how we were dealing with our patient groups here in the UK as things were sort of playing out. And of course, in the last couple of months, we've seen some very, very rapid research. We've seen, for instance, the identification of dexamethasone as a drug that's helpful for severely unwell patients. And that is continuing to move apace. There are other aspects of clinical care that we've learnt about. I think the system has also learnt how to manage these patients, how to manage large numbers of patients. The system, I think, now can reflect on the interface between the hospital system and the care home sector, and how we managed our care home population to sort of learn some lessons moving forward. Should we have a second peak? And then, of course, the system is learning how to handle the disease at a sort of population health level. So testing, contact tracing, and all the other things that need to sort of underpin a population response to an illness like this.
Well, because it definitely does feel like things are improving over here, but I know that doctors are still really, really cautious. And I'm wondering what you could tell us about your feelings about the way things are, because people definitely feel a lot safer right now. There is less COVID around, but what can you say about the fact that there is still very much a danger out there?
There's certainly less. There is currently less COVID around than there was, and certainly I think much of the illness in this country currently is not in London. It's in other parts. It's in other parts of the country. I think, though, we can learn the lessons of what we're seeing in other countries, and countries that ostensibly dealt with things very well a few months ago, and that's slightly coming back to bite them. And we all see, unfortunately, at the moment, what's going on in Israel.
Yeah.
Having dealt very well with things in the early days, things are not quite as smooth sailing as they were. Parts of Australia have gone back into lockdown, and that's their initial response. They have relatively very few cases at the outset. So we're not out of this. We're not out of this in any fashion yet. It's still there in the community. The R number is still sitting just below 1. So it's a bit of we're walking a bit of a tightrope with this. I think we need to see what happens. It's only in the last couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, that the shops have started to open more widely. Now we've got pubs and restaurants open, sort of to see where this goes in terms of, will there be a spike of cases? And certainly there are significant concerns as we move into the winter period that we will have the double whammy of potentially more COVID cases, but also then the winter flu season, the winter season of other respiratory illnesses, and we may well have a sort of perfect storm and risk, a lot more cases and a lot of pressure on the hospital system if it turns out to be a tricky flu season alongside that's COVID.
Something I didn't think about. Before I continue with the other questions, I wanted to remind people that are watching that if you had a question for Dr. Landau, then please do feel free to write it in the comments in YouTube or in Facebook. I can see those comments, and I can definitely ask those questions for you. So once again, please do feel free to write them even now if you want, and I'll come to them shortly. We'd definitely love to hear from you as well. It's not just about me asking the questions. So please do feel free to ask. I don't think any question is a bad question. And if it is, I think Rachel will tell you. So anyway, moving on to my questions. I wanted to ask you if there was anything slightly different to what we've been discussing just previously, but is there anything that's inspired you over the past few months, and any acts of human greatness, of people rising to the occasion, anything you were sort of deeply impacted by, anything you've seen in the hospital or beyond that you could possibly share?
I think the most inspiring thing is just the fantastic sort of collective response from the community, and that, you know, that's here at a local level in our community, the way people have pulled together to help others. In a hospital context, it's the same thing. It's the sort of outpouring of kindness from people that have, you know, offered to help in the hospitals themselves, but people who have, you know, we've had community groups that have, you know, made meals for hospital staff. We've had people that have sewn masks for hospital staff, sewn scrubs. We've had children who've come in with bundles of pictures they've drawn. Really, the sort of outpouring of support for the staff, who, you know, some of whom were having a fairly difficult time of it at the peak of the surge. And of course, you know, there were reasonable numbers of staff who themselves became unwell through all of this. So I think people just felt very, very heartened. I think certainly in emergency care, we work in some quite challenging circumstances on a sort of regular basis, and winters are a challenge just about every year. And it's interesting to reflect that you don't always necessarily get the acknowledgement for that or any gratitude from the community, and we don't do it for gratitude. But as I said, you know, we work under some pretty difficult circumstances, so it was absolutely amazing to see that sort of outpouring of really affection for the NHS and affection for the frontline and concern for the frontline workers through the COVID surge.
I noticed that we have one question come through over here from one of our listeners, watchers. So I'm going to bring it up on the screen over here. I thought this would come up. I was actually planning on asking some myself, but a question from Saskia Moncha. Masks, do you think they will help prevent the spread of COVID? And thank you for interesting talk.
Thank you. Very topical question. I think the jury is still slightly out on masks. Having said that, anybody that's travelled at all, been to Southeast Asia, will know that the sort of wearing of masks has been part and parcel of their sort of behaviours and cultures for many years. When people are unwell, they go out wearing a mask so they don't spread their illness to others. And I think it's really that. It's if you wear a mask, you know, if you're coughing, your droplets are not spreading all over the place in the way they would if you were not in a mask. And I think, to be perfectly honest, there is probably an element of almost a reminder to people. You know, what the mask isn't is some sort of, you know, magic protective shield that means you can do anything and you're not going to catch the illness. But it reminds people that this is still around, this is still a problem. Maybe it helps people to remember to social distance. As I said, rather than being some sort of magic, you know, protective shield. I think we need to wear the masks. I think the evidence is coming back from other countries, and we're a little bit behind that curve. I think a number of countries have made mask wearing compulsory in a way that we haven't in this country yet. And I know the government has announced masks in shops from next week. I wonder whether that, I suspect that's probably going to go a little bit broader than shops in the weeks to come. And I think it's probably the right thing. We're now wearing masks in the hospitals. All staff and visitors need to wear masks, and that's been the case for probably, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks now. So I think they're here to stay for the moment.
Well, that's interesting. And just on the actual masks, and just a bit more of a technical question on the masks themselves. When I was volunteering, again, in my brief stint at Nightingale, they provided us with the FFP3 mask, the full face protection 3, which is, as you know, I'm just explaining to people who are watching, it's a mask which just offers a lot more protection than the average mask. And given the fact that it seems like, from the way I'm understanding what you're saying, that the masks are almost there to remind us about COVID, do you think that the average person would need to invest in one of those, or just the standard ones will suffice?
The government guidance is actually, you know, it's face coverings for non-clinical purposes.
Right.
Hospitals, the expectations are that the clinical staff are in surgical masks while they're at work. Visitors and the guidance, I think, in shops is around covering the face. So you don't need to be an FFP. You don't need to be an FFP3 masks to go to the supermarket. Obviously there are some individuals that might be more vulnerable than others by virtue of their own health issues. Obviously that's a sort of different situation. I think the concern in this country around early mask wearing was that it would exhaust the PPE supplies. And if everybody tries to get themselves supplies of FFP masks, that we will run into problems. The government say now they have enough PPE. But a face covering will go some of the way.
Yeah.
FFP3 mask, and you wouldn't use it in a clinical environment, but will go some of the way too.
Okay, that's really helpful. That's really good. Thank you for that. It's helpful to know. We have another question over here from someone who's from Shoshana Copeland. Do you think the government have got the timing right with the reopening of shops or pubs, etc.? And do you think schools will reopen properly in September?
Oh dear. I think a little bit more time will tell whether the shops and pubs reopening is going to cause us a problem or not. My entirely non-medical opinion is you walk around the high streets now, you walk around shops, and it does feel like people have slightly forgotten about social distancing, which is a bit of a worry. Mm-hmm. So I think it hasn't gone away, and we need to continue to do things safely. Do I think the schools will reopen properly in September? I suspect they might reopen. Whether they will stay open is another question. Mm-hmm. I think the government at the moment is redefining what a bubble is in order to try and manage, particularly in secondary school, where it's a challenge to move kids around because they need to be with different groups of students for different subjects. And of course, that doesn't work for the sort of bubble from a COVID point of view. So I think the government is slightly rewriting those rules. To be honest, I think only time will tell. I think we're going to go through a period of time where we're going to have school opening, followed by maybe some local closures. I think if people become unwell at a particular school in a particular year group, you may have groups of children or staff sent home for periods of time. So I think it's going to be a little bit stop-start, but we all hope that school will start again in September.
Yeah, I think I'm very much hoping for that. Just on a on a personal level, I've been enjoying the fact that my son in year 1 is back at school. I love him dearly, but it's been a nice break for us for 3 months with the children at home.
In Melbourne, where I come from, they've just gone back to another 6 weeks of homeschooling. So there are a lot of really excited parents over there. Yeah,
no, I can imagine.
Say hello to my sister at this point.
And I say good luck to her at this point as well. I realize we're coming to the end. If people want to ask some questions just before we come to an end, then please do feel free to do so. It's been a real privilege to have you on, and also to have you as a member of our community as well. I just feel really inspired, not just by you, but by what you represent, and that is the NHS as a whole. I know people laugh about the fact that all we could do is clap outside our front doors, but there wasn't much more we could do, and it was done with a lot of heart and a lot of meaning. And we really do appreciate, massively everything that you've been doing. And we don't know everything you've been doing, but I can tell that it's been a lot. And just from the bottoms of our hearts, thank you so much for everything you do and have done and continue to do.
Thank you, and I know what's been amazing right through all of this has been, the moral support coming from people sort of near and far, and sometimes just little things like a text message saying that we're thinking of you is really, 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 really heartfelt, and for me at a personal level, but I also know my colleagues, my team, how sometimes even those little gestures are so appreciated when people are under pressure. Thank you so much again. Good luck with everything you do in the future. We are rooting for you here at Woodside Park. You too, and can I say B'Hatzlacha to you in your upcoming new role?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're obviously here at Woodside Park.
Thank you very much. My time at Woodside Park has been fantastic, especially with members such as yourself, and I mean that. I mean, I've learned so much from everyone, I'll miss everyone dearly, but we'll remain very closely connected. So once again, good luck with everything you do. Thank you so much to everyone else who is listening as well. This is unfortunately the second to last one that I'll be doing here at Woodside Park, and I will definitely miss these talks. So please do tune in next week for the very last big conversation that we do at Woodside Park. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for all your questions, and looking forward to seeing you all next week.